In October, the Media Actually team attended the International Press Institute World Congress and Media Innovation Festival in Vienna.
There, we had the opportunity to interact with media shapers, journalists, innovators, and industry leaders who are shaping the future of free media.
As part of the conference, we held a workshop on ethical AI and recorded this episode with 2 media makers to unpack the relationship between audience needs and trust in media.
We spoke about the current global trends in audience trust and some novel strategies and solutions being implemented by media outlets and professionals.
Khalil Cassimally is a consultant and he advocates for audience-driven approaches in the media industry. He focuses on user needs, product work, and AI, and he serves as the head of special projects at The Conversation, a leading publisher of research-based news and analysis. He's a frequent speaker at industry conferences and is based in Mauritius.
Bhanupriya Rao is the founder of BehanBox, an award-winning digital publication that focuses on deep-dive reportage of issues from the lens of gender and marginality in India. She's a passionate advocate for accessible, democratic right to information as a public good. I'm Surabi. I work at the intersection of tech, media, and gender, and I'm also a podcast nerd.
I am Mosati, and I support organizations create space for engagement, impact, and growth. We are part of the RNW Media team.
And this is a podcast where we make sense of media from the ground up.
We explore public interest media in a changing world, from challenges like trust deficit, disinformation, censorship, and sustainability,
to innovations in AI, media funding, and online safety, and helping media makers make their work impactful.
You'll hear from journalists, from thinkers, from organizations who are working in the front lines of media development.
Because media isn't just about the headlines, it's also influencing us and shaping our societies.
This is Media Actually.
Bhanupriya, Khalil, welcome to the podcast.
All right, so let's begin the conversation. And let me begin with you, Khalil, because you're the audience expert or audience development expert. What really led you into this work of audience development, and what kind of projects are you currently working on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I feel like I just sort of stumbled upon it, really. There's no real plan, but I think from a very young age, I was always very interested in journalism. But don't actually have a journalism background, so I studied sciences. And that's sort of like my journey. So I did science. I initially wanted to be an academic, a researcher. I did 1 year of research, and I was like, I'm more interested in the theory than the practical. But work with Nature Publishing Group. So that was sort of the bridge from sciences to journalism. And then shifted to The Conversation and worked there for a long time. I'm a consultant now. But I think for many people who work in the industry, after a number of years, I think many people feel like this is not necessarily what we thought it would be being in the media. And for me, I sort of realized that we are very disconnected from people. And I think that is foundational to a lot of the problems that we see, in the industry. And sort of wanted to do something about it. So hence the audience development work and trying to reconnect newsrooms with audiences, really.
Right, yeah. Very, very cool.
And I love that you also said that you haven't studied journalism. I think it's very similar also. For me, I have a degree in public health, but I've always been interested in journalism, and the parallel of being disconnected is also true for academia often, right? Like we're in our ivory towers and we don't know what's happening on the ground, but that can also be true very much for journalism and media. Banu, turning to you, I am a big admirer of BehanBox. I love the stories and the reporting that you do. And I wanted to understand, how did the idea come about and why BehanBox?
Yeah, actually, very interesting that there are 2 people in this room who have already said they had nothing to do with journalism, stumbled upon into journalism by chance. And the story is similar here. I'm not a career journalist, and I like to keep saying this all the time. I've never seen the insides of a newsroom ever. But what I used to work in was public policy. And as you mentioned, Sam, on a lot of campaigns on what democratic and just governance must look like for people, for it to work. And so for us, what I'd seen very early was that for people's lives to improve and for them to claim themselves to be part of a democracy, as we are in India, the governance system has to work. The public policy has to work in their favor. And that was an area I had worked on. And what I saw was that with that being such a crucial link, what really wasn't happening was making this crucial link accessible to the wider public. So all of us working in the area knew why governance must work, but it was very difficult to explain to, say, someone like my mom or people around me as to why this matters. And that was a gap we found. And what we also found was that, all forms of marginality, gender being only one form of marginality, and where we work in India, there are multiple forms of marginality, caste being one of the most insidious systems in the world that just doesn't go away even with having the most progressive constitution. We found that those perspectives, and when you flipped the lens, if you saw issues from those lenses, they were just missing in the media. So gender was often covered as an event, as just one of the things that happened, a rape here, a molestation there. But really, how are our policies patriarchal? How are women and gender diverse persons at different intersections of the margins, how are they figuring in public policy? We needed to make sense of it ourselves, right? And that needed deep dive reportage. But we also needed to make sense for it to the public in a way that they are able to see it. As we say in journalism, show, not tell. So we wanted to do that. And we chose the tool of journalism precisely for this reason, that we can keep opinionating about it and writing op-eds and so on. But we really needed to show that this was how it was. And that's where the idea of a journalism outfit that was dedicated to margins, but from the point of view of margins and gender, was the need of the times. And it really started as an experiment. But soon enough, people saw the value in it. People saw themselves in it. So here we are, 5 years down the line, we're still telling stories.
And maybe for our audience who's not from India, if you can also explain the name of the journalism project itself. Behan, of course, is a Hindi word, but if you can maybe expand upon that and how the word itself came about as the name for the project.
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Survi, because it's one of the things that we get to hear quite a lot in India. Oh, what a fantastic name, or what an innovative name. And because so many things we take for granted, they have a ring to the public. And one of the things that when you mentioned about audience trust, really, it starts with the name as well. So Behan in Hindi, which is one of the languages in India and not the national language, I must tell our readers or listeners, it means sister. And in India, a Behan has a very different connotation, apart from being like a filial relationship of being a sister. It also means the idea of sisterhood. It means there is something very intimate about two women calling each other Behan. It's almost like we are bound by some traditions, some commonality, some shared culture, but also shared issues and shared histories and shared struggles and all of that. And so it was for us a no-brainer, because it's very usual for me to call my friend, hey, Behan. And so when we were thinking of a name that signified the stories we were going to tell from the point of view of marginality and gender, Behan had to figure that, it was almost as if we were creating a shared space. It was a space where people like us were going to be seen. So that's where the name BehanBox comes from. We also wanted an English equivalent to it, so which is why box sort of, it connotes the global nature of the struggle almost, but it is like a feminist space.
Bringing it back to audiences, and I like that you say that it was an experiment that you actually started and you've been running it for about 5 years. How have you been experimenting with your audiences, and how have you been seeing the response from them?
Yeah, in the initial years, we were focused on getting the journalism right, right? And so for us, we were very clear in our heads about the kind of stories we wanted to tell. We were also very clear about what our stories will look like, what the structure and the texture and the people in our stories look like. So if you see a BehanBox story, you will see that people are not victims of anything. They are all marginal people at the margins of the society, but they're not someone who demand your pity. What they do demand is they're active citizens. They are citizens for whom the structures, the state, the society, and all of the systems aren't working enough. What we tried to do with our storytelling was to focus through people the larger structures, the inequities that shape who we are, And so for us, that was very important in building trust, because that was showing people as people, right, who deserve dignity, who deserve citizenship, and who deserve equal place in the democracy. And much as we talk about so many other factors in building audience trust and so on, I don't think anything comes close as being authentic, as being as showing people who they are, making people feel seen. And that really helped us right from the start. Today, when I think about it, reflect upon how we started to build audience trust and audiences, we didn't start with, hey, this is the audience we are targeting, or this is the way we want to target. We always started, and still today stick to, this is a story we want to tell. And and in telling of the story is where we built the trust of the audience. Yes, of course, we do different things to reach different audiences. So we do all of the things that perhaps Khalil's going to talk about in terms of segmenting audiences, using different formats as well, whether it's podcasts or even different formats during different times. For example, when we had one of the largest elections last year, we started what's called the Feminist Election Newsroom, where we wanted to say that elections are a feminist issue. We cannot be sidelined after 75 years of being in a democracy. 50% of the population cannot be sidelined or just be on the periphery. We need to be part of the decision-making process. But for that, if we wanted to reach different audiences, we use different formats, right? That we normally wouldn't use in our storytelling. So that is how we've kind of done that. But I cannot emphasize enough that telling a good story as authentically as possible and rigorously as possible without reducing people to being objects of pity is something that is perhaps the single biggest factor that has worked in our favor. The other thing that has worked very well for us is our amazing visuals. We do a lot of good visual stories as well. We have a fantastic visual storyteller within us. And it's something that we stumbled upon. It's not how we wanted to do. We set out to do it, but that has worked. What our words say with what we say with words, these visuals kind of complement that beautifully, and that's been able to help us build trust.
Yeah. And I think I want to come back, because this has come up in our other podcast episodes as well before, this tension between, or maybe not a tension, but it can be counterintuitive in some ways. For instance, what you mentioned about not necessarily always thinking from the lens of like, what does the audience want or need, but also how can we be authentic in the stories we want to tell? And then how does that square with also what the audience needs, not necessarily wants, but needs. And we'll come back to that in a bit. But Khalil, I wanted to bring you in the conversation to what Bhanu was saying. How do you also think about the user needs model that you have been working on? How does that relate to some of the aspects of what Bhanu has mentioned in terms of audience engagement?
Yeah, I think the authenticity is obviously very important, and what I hear, from you, Bhanu, is the audience feels like it's authentic, so they feel like they're heard, and that is a need. People need to feel that they're heard, and the user needs model, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but the user needs model is effectively just one way to sort of move from a point of us in the media we're like, yeah, I think I know where I'm coming from. I think I know what the audience needs. But when you have something written down, basically, it just brings that sort of clarity. And that's really the user needs model. The user needs model was created by the BBC World Service nearly a decade ago now. And it was based on a lot of research that they did with their audiences in different parts of the world. And what they realized was that mostly irrespective of where people are in the world, of their age, gender, etc., there are some key needs that people have when it comes to media consumption or news consumption. And broadly, they can be categorized in four groups. People need to know what's happening. People need to understand why things are happening. People need to feel something about what's happening, and people need to do something about what's happening. So when the model goes a bit deeper, there are more specific needs, but they are across those four categories. Now, what we see is when newsrooms use that model, they've got those sort of four categories mapped out. From a content strategy point of view, it becomes much easier for them to now say, okay, those are the needs that we want to serve for the audience. I've got a topic that I want to cover, right? The model doesn't tell you what you can't or can't cover. But once you know that I want to cover this topic, I want to cover this issue, then the model gives you a lens, gives you a frame through which you can cover the topic or the issue in a way that is more valuable to the audience, right? Because if we can take any story, you can explain what's happening, right? That's your classic breaking news story. Yeah. Then you can go deeper. You can explain, okay, why is this happening? What's the broader context? You can help people do something about this as well, So there are so many frames, so many ways to go into stories. And the user need model really helps organizations, helps media professionals, help newsrooms do that in a systematic manner. And what I would say is the model is becoming more and more popular all over the world. You have smaller organizations, smaller operations, medium-sized, large operations, different parts of the world using the model now and really seeing big success, which I can go into as well. But it's been really successful.
I was going to ask, could you give us an example? Because I know you work with many newsrooms to really implement this model. So could you give us an example of one that has probably worked successfully?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few. One example would be with The Conversation, for example. So The Conversation has newsrooms all over the world. So what we did was so the UK edition of The Conversation, they were very specific in that they wanted to be valuable, or part of their content, they wanted to be valuable to young professionals. So implemented the user needs model to be explicitly valuable for that audience. So by catering to the specific needs, what they found was that people were spending more time on the articles. Social media just went nuts, right? More reach, more engagement, etc. What was also interesting is they started getting more traffic to those articles as well. So here, this is an example of where, you see the result very concretely in numbers. And there are many, right? BBC News Russia decided to publish fewer articles, but because they were now more focused on specific needs, the reach tripled. Again, this is a very concrete number-based example. But then there are loads of newsrooms that are seeing those successes. But there are also the kind of more qualitative victories, I suppose, when there's this newsletter-based operation based in Europe, and I can't name them just yet. But what they found was when they started implementing the user needs model and made it a systematic part of their editorial workflow, very quickly they started getting emails from subscribers saying that, okay, this is really cool, right? And remember, the audience doesn't know what you're doing, right? No one cares about the user needs model. But the audience realized that something had changed, and they realized that the newsletters that they were receiving were somehow more valuable to them. And I don't think I don't think there's anything better than getting direct feedback from audiences, in this case unprompted, which is telling you that, oh, what you're doing is really valuable for me. I think this is one of the key reasons why we come into this industry in the first place. And the user needs model is helping us do that.
And so maybe 2 points that I think are quite pertinent here is first that you mentioned that editorial decision-making around content still remains with the newsroom or the team in this case, but then the user needs model helps you to understand how do you deliver it in the best way possible to your audiences, right? And then the second, and maybe either of you can answer, or both of you can answer, do you have a preference, or in your research, we always talk about quality versus quantity, for instance. How do newsrooms assess them? Of course, numbers give a bigger impact, but doesn't necessarily indicate change. How do you assess the user needs model in terms of quantitative impact versus quality? Or it's either or, is it both?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, one of the first things that we do when I start working with newsrooms that are implementing the user needs model, we do a bit of what we call a content audit. And that is really to sort of see currently how well is the newsroom serving the different needs that you want to serve for your audience. So the audit effectively shows us how many articles or pieces of content you're publishing that are serving the different needs. And then we look at whatever metrics is important for the newsrooms, whether that's reach, engagement, conversions, etc. What we always find, or practically always find, is there is a mismatch between content production and the needs of the audiences, right? There tends to be an overproduction of stories that serve the update me need. So that's your breaking news, what's just happened, right? We publish quite a lot of that. We don't publish that much help me content, help me do something. That's your guides, etc. Right? We don't publish too much connect me stories, which is, make me feel connected as part of the community, help me do something for my community. But when we look at the metrics, the update me ones typically will, on average, less traffic or less engagement or less conversions, whereas the help me, convert me, inspire me, those get more traffic, more engagement, etc. So it's a very clear message from the audience that those are the needs that are important for me. That is not to say that update me is not important, but clearly there is a big need that we are not serving, because within the industry, we sort of think that we need to do update me. So then the solution is obvious. Publish a bit fewer update me, publish a bit more help me, connect me, inspire me, wherever the gaps are. And once you do this is when you start getting the emails from people. And this is when, even from a business or sustainability point of view, your KPIs, you're meeting your KPIs, and hopefully that puts you on the path of sustainability going forward.
The user needs model is one way for media organizations to become more audience informed and provides a set of needs that most people have when they're consuming news content. It is not about telling the newsroom what it should or should not cover. It merely acts as a guide to do a story from an angle the audience values. To learn more, you can find a link in the podcast description. And for BehanBox, Bhanu, was there a content audit similar what Khalil is mentioning that was done in the beginning to understand what are the audience needs, or has it been done in the recent few years? And do you find interesting things that you were like, okay, the audience actually wants this more rather than what we are delivering at this point?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So what Khalil's been talking about in his user, and we've talked between ourselves quite a bit about it over the last 1 year or so. As newsrooms that are led by journalism or journalists and editors, we don't start off by thinking about the needs we are trying to serve, right? And that happened in our case as well. What we were trying to do is what I said earlier, that we wanted to tell the stories that were not being told in a way we thought had to be told. Now, over time, what has happened is we've heard back from our users. And here I will stress on users as opposed to just readers, right? And I'll come back to that. So we heard back from users as to what was really helping them. Why they found our stories useful.
Interesting, yeah.
And in what ways they found it useful, right? And here it's not just about, hey, you just informed me about something that I didn't know what the life of a street vendor in India looked like, right? It was also that what was not working about the system, how they were part of the violence that is being perpetuated both by the state and by the society and so on. So we weren't following a user needs model, but we were able to clearly understand from what our readers were telling us. And mind you, we were not seeking the readers out. We were not asking them, hey, tell us what is working, what isn't. It was so generous of them to have come to us and said that, hey, you did this article and it really helped us understand. And I'm now using this to do my research on street vendors. I've had students come who are starting a PhD in London or whatever, come and tell me that, I'm doing this research. Can you put me in touch with some street vendor networks, etc., who can help me understand this better also? And this is just one example I'm giving you. Street vendors is one category. This tells us something large about the economy and informality in India. And so I'm looking at, say, the Amazon workers in India, and I can draw out some lessons from this, and which will help me with my research. So that is the user needs, which goes beyond beyond our even what we are trying to do. We are trying to inform people here, right? And here people are using it for so many other things. But to what Khalil's framework, the user needs model that he's talking about, over time we realize that what we are doing is not really falling into the update me category, because not in the breaking news sense of the term, but there is an update me element to it, which is, hey, I just did not know that, say, for example, Trump's tariffs are affecting women workers in India. The decisions.
And I think I shared with you, that was one of my favorite pieces from BehanBox, because there was no conversation around gender or caste marginality in tariff discussion on India at all. So I think when we spoke couple of days back, we actually discussed it. I was like, that was one story that really stood out to me in terms of what was missing in the conversation on tariffs. But sorry, so go ahead.
No, absolutely. The decisions that were being taken in Washington on tariffs, and India is one of the highest tariff regimes that Trump's administration has imposed. For the rest of the media, I've been talking about are very important. I'm not dismissing that. Very important on the economics of it. But what does it mean in the life of a woman worker whose life is completely upended by the decision taken back there in Washington? So there is the update me element in that as well. But then also in the same story comes, apart from update me, give me clarity, connect me with the whole world, the connect the dots element to it. And somewhere somebody is taking some action. We don't know that yet, right? So all of that somehow falls into we've seen that falling into the place without us really sort of doing it in the initial stages. But now, in this 1 year, since we've learned about the user needs model, and I've told you this, Khalil, as well, that we've started to implement that within our newsroom. And as we speak, we are actually doing a user needs survey, like an audience needs assessment thing as we go along into the next year, because we're 5 years old now, and we now feel that, okay, we need to move beyond storytelling, right? I mean, that continues. We know how to do that. That is the foundation of what we do. But what else can we build, especially on the help me, inspire me bit? What are the resources that we can build specifically for the users that we already know are our users, right? So what are the products? So all of this is going to help us build our next round of products.
Right. I like that you think about audience not only as audience, but also as users. And that sort of implies trust as well, which is where I want to lead the conversation a bit to. And I want us to draw out a little bit from, the newsroom and look at the state of the media landscape globally, really. Earlier this year, the digital media report by the Reuters Institute of Journalism shows that trust in news has remained at about 40% for a third year in the row. But this is still 4 points below, what was overall at the height of the coronavirus pandemic. Khalil, why is this the case?
Where do I start? I mean, yeah, it's interesting that the trust has sort of plateaued at 40%. Is seen as sort of generally seen as like, oh, good thing, it's not falling. 40% means that 60% of people don't trust us. And let's be honest, like, who can blame those 60%? In conferences, etc., and when we talk to peers and stuff, we always seem to talk quite a lot about the value of journalism. It's important, and yeah, of course, it's important. But open a newspaper, like look at the front page. I lived in London for 3 years. I look at the Times. Every single day, there's Islamophobic. Every single day, it's racism in the front page. The Times is meant to be one of the, the paper of record of the UK. I'm not even talking about tabloids, right? I'm talking about a supposedly serious paper. And I remember distinctly that I was at a conference where the then editor of the Sunday Times, or maybe the Times itself, I can't remember now, sort of lambasted everyone in the audience, saying that, oh, we need more diversity in newsrooms. We need to do more. What is this? The thing that you're publishing is completely different from what you're now talking about, right? So many people feel hurt by media coverage. So many people feel the direct impact of the bad things that we do. I completely believe that as an industry, we are now doing more harm than we are doing good for the majority of people in this world. And if we continue in that direction, maybe it's a good thing that people don't trust us, because there are other, people that you can trust. Academics have consistently been top ranked in those kind of studies, even when there is it seems like a systematic campaign to sort of discredit academics. People trust them, and that's a good thing. If we don't change in the media, if we don't become more valuable to people, if we don't bring that empathy back, if we don't connect, all of those things are connected.
What went wrong as an industry? What went wrong for us?
I mean, it didn't used to be like this, right? We are an industry that was created to serve people, and then we just forgot that we're meant to serve people. And we can go into the many hypotheses as to why that's happened, but I think it's important to just say that this is the case, and I think within the industry we need to recognize that this is the case, right? Enough with the thing that, oh, we're really important, people should consume our information because we know best. Enough. Where's that taking us? It's time to change. It's time to reconnect with audiences, because that is the only way we're going to change. We need to reconnect with people, be able to empathize with people, be able to link to groups or networks or people who are already doing a lot of good things. Help them, right? We don't have a monopoly in information. Help people. When we help people, when we are valuable to people, people feel connected. When people feel connected, people see the value. When people see the value, people see the quality. When people see the quality, people trust. This is it. This is what we need to do.
I like that you sort of provide a framework for how we get back to trust as well. And now I want to sort of zoom in using you as an example, Banu, and then look at, because other studies have also shown there's a big distrust in online news, and you're a primarily online publication, right? How are you managing to, and then you've talked a little bit about this, but how are you managing to connect with audiences to start to build that trust? Because you're at that point now where you want to build trust and no longer just, tell the story. So what is your plan, and especially with what you do around gender-focused storytelling?
I strongly believe that there is a loss of trust, yes, but there is a loss of trust in a particular kind of media, right? And this is where I think it's both an opportunity, but also it's something that what we end up doing when we say, hey, media is homogenizing all of the media, right? There is the big corporate-led media, as you were talking about, in terms of what went wrong. There's the whole economics that has gone wrong, and then there is the whole sort of big platforms and so on and so forth, which have atomized audiences instead of, as I was talking to someone yesterday, reading and news consumption used to be a communal activity. We were all reading from the same page and so on and so forth. So we need to bring in that together. But for us, specifically for the question you asked, what we're doing to build audience trust, we are falling back on what has worked for us, right? It is not just about whose stories we tell. Yes, of course, that's worked. But in what way do we tell the stories, right? Apart from whose stories we tell, that storytelling needs to be rigorous and driven by evidence. And I've often wondered why, with all of the sort of critical nature we take of the government, whichever government we're talking about, because we are placing all of our people within the framework of government policy. So we're obviously criticizing the government, whether it is the national government or state governments and so on. But we've never been trolled by your so-called online trolls. And why does that happen? Because when we present something, we are doing it with evidence. And we are equally critical of whoever is in power. And that is not neutrality as much as doing good journalism, right? We are not neutral. We are just being true to the story that we are trying to say. So providing the context is very important, and I cannot emphasize this enough with audiences that it's very easy for us to dismiss, say, the Gen Zs and so on, and say that, hey, they're not interested in news, or they don't trust. I have a counter theory to that, and that is that it's not that they do not trust. We are not serving them enough in the way that they want to consume information, because they are active citizens of whichever country or even globally. We need to give them information with the clarity, with the context. We have to tell them how we arrived at this point, and they will engage with. And we've seen that happen a lot. The second biggest category among our audiences are the Gen Zs. And you'd think, who do Gen Zs read long form stuff? Because we are all about long form. They do and they don't, right? Some that they do, some that actually do are reading because we provide the context to it. We're not saying, hey, this is just the information. This is the whole history of it. And believe me, history makes writing, telling people what has led to this moment works for us. So I think I will still keep going back to the way of building trust in audience is to be rigorous and authentic, because once you've sorted that out, you just have to keep building on that, right? Not slip down. So one bad story from you and you're done. So you have to consistently keep that up. And that means for us, small teams like us, do less, but keep that as your central mission, that you've got to, as Khalil said, you've got to serve them. And in what best ways can you serve them? Can you serve them by doing less? Yes, then do it, which is the approach we're taking. We're not into sort of producing too much.
I think that also explains a bit about why explanatory journalism is doing so well. For instance, people are interested in knowing about nuance, right? Like, I think despite the fact that people are engaging with reels and short form, there's also fatigue there, and they would like to learn what was the context of the story, why so-and-so happened, what is the nuance. And we have seen that people who are producing, as you said, not content every day, but long-form pieces, even video content, and providing more contextual references is getting more attention from people. Like, for instance, the popular YouTuber Dhruv Rathi in India, who's not even a journalist, but he does these long-form explanatory videos and gets millions of views. So I think I agree there's a hunger for that kind of contextualization and nuance. But I wanted to ask you, Khalil, because you mentioned about trust, and of course, trust is declining not just in media, but broadly in public institutions, right? So that's a broader contextual question of what's gone wrong. But I mean, there have been a lot of conversations and panels also at the conference here on economics and, the funding mechanisms. I don't hear enough about trust element there. Like, of course, there's this question of the funding crunch and, the survival and the viability of media work. But how can we think more about trust in this relation to the economics of the media doing its work?
Yeah, I mean, we know that in the industry, economically, things are not great. Again, that's a bit of a generalization. And Bhanu, thank you for sort of bringing the nuance to that as well. In general, it's not great, but there are definitely a lot of bright lights, and BehanBox being one of them. But there are a lot of typically smaller organizations, and in my experience, smaller operations that are kind of more horizontally led, less hierarchy. So typically young people, right? That is sort of like a clear observation. So younger people who sort of come together and try to do something. You're right, that trust in media is part of a broader problem in terms of trust in authorities and institutions, etc. I think a lot of it comes from the disconnect and the power imbalance that people now feel is happening. At the risk of being like too critical of journalism, of the media as an industry, again, we tell everyone that we are meant to, talk to power, blah, blah, blah. But more often than not, we align ourselves to power. Again, this is a generalization. This is the industry in general. There are obviously a lot of organizations that don't do that. But if that is the impression that people get, that we are aligned with those in power, I don't think it's easy, I suppose, to understand why then people don't trust us. So now when you bring the funding element to it, my supposition is that people don't necessarily know or think too much about where the money is coming from for most media organizations. But when they do want to find out, a lot of people will open their eyes and start saying, okay, this is funded by X, so can I trust this or not? So those questions become, et cetera, et cetera. But again, we don't have any say, we being the people in this case, we don't have any say about funding. So for me, if we have more say about funding, that would be really interesting. It's not a surprise that the BBC in the UK is quite trusted. People sort of pay for the BBC, maybe not directly, but people do pay. There is academic research, again from the UK, that sort of wanted to think about a more democratic and socialist model of media funding, public media funding, in a sense. And it was that part of the tax that you pay, let's just say that X% is going to go to media. But you, as the individual, as the citizen, you decide where you want to put the money. So then suddenly the power shifts. The power is no longer with everyone else. The power is with you. You have now an opportunity to fund certain media organizations. Obviously, this is not like a free-for-all where people have you fund anyone. Government still has sort of a regulatory role to play, but people have more power. And when people have more power, the organization become more accountable to people. And then hopefully that is, at least in my mind, that is a system that sort of bridges that power disconnect, and could potentially lead to a much better relationship between media and people, and hopefully a much better form of society that we want to live in, where we're sort of all together and not elites against everyone else, as is often perceived.
I mean, the digital media report that Sam was referring to did mention that audience trust is linked to, for instance, transparency around ownership and funding of media organizations. And I wanted to ask you, Bhanu, have you looked at how, I mean, first of all, are you transparent in terms with your audience of where the funding comes from, for instance, for BehanBox? Or what has the thinking been around those lines in terms of having transparency with the audience? Or have you been asked from your users about how do you fund the work, the incredible work that you're doing?
Yeah, very interesting. And the answer is we've never been asked by our audience as to where our funding comes from, And when we have been asked, it's not in terms of scrutiny, but always like, how do you manage to do this stuff? Because it is resource intensive because this is real ground reports we're talking about. So there are layers of resources that go into first reporting, all of the travel and all of that, and then fact checking and editing and production and all of that. It's resource intensive. It's almost like how old school journalism used to be. And so the whenever we've had questions from the audience, it's almost like, but how do you fund yourself? And in that moment, we are very transparent, obviously. But you're right in terms of, and it's something we are working on in our next iteration of our website and processes, that we do want to be very transparent that this is the quantum that comes from grants, this is the quantum that comes from doing client service work and so on and so forth. But to your question in terms of how, what is the level of transparency that audiences look for, I think, and in my experience, everyone would want to know. Knowledge is power and information is power. But they care, I think, quite a bit when they are able to see that thing is not serving them, that media is not serving them. As we are seeing in the case of India, right? We are seeing extreme corporate takeover of mainstream media. Is so much so that two big groups have control over large English language media and also regional language media, right? And when you hear, when people see bias and Islamophobia and all kinds of pushing the scams under the carpet and so on and so forth, there are questions like who is, and the answers are pretty clear. Whose media is this, right? When they align with the government, when they go and ask the prime minister, or they do not ask the prime minister anything about their policies, but hey, how do you happen to be so handsome, and how do you brush your hair so well, and so on. No, this is a fact. They do that. So you do know, and that is why we have a term called Godi media in India, which is like your lapdog media translated into English. So the funding becomes very crucial. The information and transparency around that becomes crucial when people spot it, they will also ask those questions. But and that happens on the opposite side as well with the so-called liberal media, the right wing is always asking, but who's funding those guys, right? And so on. So extreme polarization is leading to these questions, and these are right questions to be asked and so on. But I also do feel that when you are doing public interest journalism work, as we are doing, as so many others are doing, I think the transparency around funding becomes crucial, and it should be more sort of proactively disclosed by the institution, in this case us. But that, at least in our case, it hasn't led to a trust deficit. And that is a good thing up until now. But that also means that we need to be proactively transparent, and which we hope to be.
I like that idea of proactive transparency. But then the thing is, the media industry at this moment, and if you think about these different newsrooms, are always trying to experiment with different revenue models. How do newsrooms get proactive in the disclosures, transparency disclosures, that this is where we get funding from, especially when they're, changing business models left, right, and center? without overwhelming audiences that, oh, now you've changed again. Now, is this a thing that you think about or have any thoughts?
I mean, based on some research that we have done at The Conversation, that's from a couple of years ago. So one of the things that we are quite keen to know from the audience is basically what are some of the key characteristics that you associate with The Conversation. So for example, written by academics, right? Everything on The Conversation is written by academics, goes through an editing process, etc. But the authors are academics. So that's one key characteristic. Interestingly, funding or source of funding or transparency about funding, that is not something that people will rank specifically high when it comes to a characteristic of The Conversation. But when you go to The Conversation, the desktop website especially, it's very much clear there how the project is funded, right? Majority of the funding comes from universities. Some funding will come from non-profits, but also from readers, right? But the majority comes from the universities. That's quite clear. I think my point is, for the majority of people, this is not the priority concern. Sure, for some it is, but for the majority it isn't. But again, The Conversation is not necessarily the primary source of information for the majority of people. It's a secondary source because people want to, get the more context, touch with opinions, evidence-based opinions that maybe they don't get elsewhere. So I think The Conversation is probably an illustration of those. I mean, The Conversation is big, but of kind of the more niche, specific organizations where priorities are a bit different. I'm sure the BBC's done similar research, and if someone from the BBC was here, they would have said, okay, maybe that is actually for them, for their audience, that is more of a priority, and that is something for them to then consider. Yeah.
But I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier, which is, do we wait until the audience wants to know about how it's being funded, or do we, as you mentioned, proactively are transparent? And maybe that is an underlying factor. Perhaps they're not asking because they are aware. They are going to the website and they have seen how it's being funded. So they trust that the organization is able to convey that already. So it's quite interesting, I think, that, do we wait until the audience it demands it, or do we proactively serve our audience and are fully transparent what our funding sources are? But maybe we can move from the economics part to the big tech, because that's another big aspect of how trust is being mediated in today's world with media. And maybe from both of you, and either of you can feel free to go first, how do you think big tech is changing the way the audience is negotiating or navigating trust with media in today's age?
Okay, I'm really the wrong person to start this conversation off with, because I'm going to slack that big tech off. I really feel that we need alternative models to this big tech and this whole dependency on big tech, and of course we need to understand what the nature of big tech is as well. But here's what I believe, and I've seen this, that as a consumer both of physical newspapers back in the day and magazines specifically, to a completely digital sort of consumption of news and information and knowledge in general. What I feel, of course, it is. I think we don't really need to discuss that it's readily available. You have to work seemingly less harder to get information, but that's not true. In real time.
Good information.
Good information, quality information, and so on. But theoretically, it's there somewhere in some corner of the internet. And of course, you can build audiences as quickly or as rapidly, and depending on what you mean by quickly and building audience means in the first place. All of that, obviously. But here's what I feel the way it has mediated and what we're seeing is this freely available or sitting in some corner of somewhere information has meant the reduction of the value of what you're producing. Right. Now think of it from a producer's point of view, which is us. We are going through this rigorous practice from start to finish and so on. And yet we've got to work harder on the reach and engagement side of things as opposed to this. And we're constantly wondering, how is it being used? How is it reaching people, and so on and so forth, right? And then what does also the value of that mean in your physical products scenario? All of that was there in one place, and as I said earlier as well, that consumption used to be a more communal experience. That has big tech has atomized people, so it seems more connected, but it's not. Also,
more fragmented.
It's more fragmented. It's also, all of this attention and that sort of thing, we don't really need to talk about because that's well established, and that's for all of us to see. But what does it mean now with AI and all that sort of thing coming in? Also, is it seems like we're talking quite a lot about workflows and greater efficiencies and so on and so forth, but fundamentally, what is journalism supposed to do? Right? What is knowledge creation supposed to do? Is that being held in control? Do we have control over it as producers and so on? It's a question I keep asking myself every day, but I also keep thinking how to subvert all of this. How to have this direct relationship between us as producers and the audiences, so that they have direct relationship with the stories and the people that we're talking about. I have no answer. I do have answers to that, but I will probably tell you next year when we've experimented on things on that front.
And does it not bother, maybe that's not the right word, but does it worry you that the first thing we always think about when we produce content, and I'm not saying BehanBox does it, but more broadly, generally, it's like, okay, how am I going to convert this information for Facebook or TikTok or for LinkedIn? Like that, we're also thinking in those specific models of how do we, because that's where the audience is.
Yeah. Does it worry me? It is something that frustrates me.
Yeah, maybe that's the right
worry
word.
me.
Yeah, frustrates me.
It frustrates me, because a good story or a good issue or an issue that is worth caring about must be cared about. I shouldn't be waking up and thinking, hey, how do I communicate this to the audience on Facebook, which is a particular demographic over, and so the resources that are going into that should have been better spent on this at them. But if we really knew whether, in these audiences, the behavior was exactly this, and therefore we can tap into that in terms of what we are trying to do at the end of the day. Journalism at the end of the day is meant to push towards some change, right? Now, is that change happening? Are we able to measure that pathway? And if we are not, then we are just serving the numbers on the, we're kind of feeding the beast, right?
And serving the algorithms.
Exactly.
Primarily.
Yeah. And now the AI and LLM. So I would rather that we spend the energy in terms of connecting people and helping people move towards the pathway of change. And I don't think big tech or any form of platform can be a conduit if used properly, but that's not happening. Everyone's just so overwhelmed and frustrated, and I think the time has come for us to become more focused and inwards as opposed to, hey, just put it out there on ether. I think there is a lot of thinking happening on how do we bring audiences in rather than us just put things out over there. And bring audience in doesn't just mean get the numbers in. It means connect people.
The quality of the connection.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's what I not worry about, but that's what I'm obsessed with, in these years, in the intervening years. But yes.
Khalil, any thoughts?
Not really, to be honest. I think it's a very complex one. I think that so a lot of good things came out of the social networks. I stay in touch with friends from high school and stuff. So stay in touch being I sort of know what's happening and can connect, all that kind of stuff. So, and that's just from my personal experience, but I think we can sort of all relate to that. But it is also true that they're not necessarily social networks anymore. They're more social feeds now. So the sort of graph has changed. And as with anything, they're the good and there's the bad side. And I think we need to talk about both. At the moment, there seems to be a bit of a backlash against the big tech, which, is warranted and necessary, I think. I think if we put the media into it, I think, again, the big platforms, if we look at it from the media perspective, the big platforms are really a way for us to get information out there. So there is a disintermediation with the audience, right? It goes through the platforms. Didn't used to be this way, but now is. But was there an alternative? I don't know, maybe, but also maybe not. I don't know. I think the point is that this is the way it is. We should obviously try to fight for a better version of what we want the world to be. I think there's also space to say, this is how it is. We have to also make the most of it, and then work accordingly. I don't think those are two separate things. I think those two can work together. And sometimes in conversations that we have with people, with the industry, etc., it's either or. When it should be both. I think we should be more on a side where we recognize that this point is important and we need to allow them to push for this, and also recognize that the other side is also important. We need to push for this. If we go kind of if I zoom out and sort of look at big tech, journalism, and I suppose societies in general, I think it's very clear that repression that happens IRL is replicated online by big tech. And one of the reasons why we've come to that point is because governments have been either so unwilling or ineffective at filling that gap. When Facebook happened, it was new. People were able to say anything. There's the good and the bad side. But as it becomes increasingly important to do content moderation, which always happens with every platform, every network, once you start to get sort of a number of people on it, content moderation becomes important. Content moderation is then taken over by big tech, not because they necessarily want, because who wants to do content moderation? It is a very complex thing, but because they have to.
Yeah.
Who should have been doing this? Authorities should have done this, right? Democratically elected governments should have found a way to do this, but it didn't. So big tech took it over. And when big tech takes over, big tech is representative of a sliver of the global population. The values are representative of a sliver of the population. And that sliver of the population is also the people in government or in authorities that are basically, whether directly or indirectly, creating repression. So you get the same mechanism online that you get offline. Just a very quick example. An indigenous group unfortunately I can't remember where, but basically an indigenous group that was marginalized in one part of the world was using YouTube to document their everyday lives. YouTube effectively became a historical documentation of an entire people's livelihood,
way of life,
etc. Yeah. YouTube, Google decided to change their policies, the privacy policy or whatever it was, and from one day to the other, deleted everything. because it was war zones, it was blah, 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 right? So from one day to the other, the entire documentation of the existence of the people disappeared, right? How is that a thing? How is that possible? You know, but it is, because the people in power, they didn't necessarily do this because they're evil, but it just happens. So those are the things that we see over and over again. I think one of the good things is we are moving in a direction where I suppose more and more people are starting to see the big platforms not as neutral necessarily, but as actively being involved in creating those harms, whether again it's direct or indirect. So there's that conversation that needs to happen. But again, just to finish, just to take it back, so the activism against that kind of power needs to happen. In parallel, ways of reaching audiences, ways of connecting with audiences, where they are, also needs to happen.
But I mean, first, like there's huge asymmetry of power there, right? As you mentioned. And I'm glad you also mentioned that now we have enough evidence to say that these platforms are not neutral, right? Like they are not good or bad. They serve a specific kind of business model. They serve specific kind of speech even. And so I wonder, like, yes, there's still people on these platforms, but then do we have to draw a line and say that we're not going to engage with these platforms anymore? And that will hit their bottom line, which is the profits they're trying to make. So I also do wonder, like, as media professionals and as consumers of these platforms, whether there is a need to draw a line now and not necessarily have the view that because audience is there, we need to go there as well, even if it does, hit us in the end in terms of not having that reach. But I mean, this is more of a question that I also struggle with a lot, because at some point we do have to consider, I guess, whether it's worth investing in these platforms anymore, knowing the harms that they're perpetuating and reproducing. I don't know. I don't have answers. That was just a thought I had.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to also mention that a big conversation that has been happening here at the World Congress of IPI is ever since Google had the AI summary, there's a 45% reduction in people going to news sites, right? So that essentially also means that audiences are not seeing news, are not seeing pieces of article that are put out there, which also impacts trust, right? In terms of assigning responsibility, and I want to throw this question to you, Khalil. Do you think that we should assign that responsibility to big tech as well, to curate, especially that now AI summaries are here, to curate trustworthy sort of sources of content that then they put out there, and they should have that moral guidance to not be able to follow one particular train of thought or one particular person and their individual thinking and so on and so forth. Would you assign that responsibility to them, or do we as media organizations and the industry have the responsibility to reach the audience in other ways and try to build trust with them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a defined answer for this one, and I'll tell you why. I think letting the big tech or Google in this specific example sort of decide what is trustworthy sources and I suppose what is not. We've done that for many years. Even before AI, the way Google ranks results on its search result pages, one key factor is trustworthiness of sources. So we have sort of done that. And what is interesting is I suppose a lot of the big brands are seen as trusted. So it's less of an issue, or it's not something that they need to think about too much. So legacy organizations, but then the newer ones actively have to think about this and actively have to work to make sure that Google starts seeing them as authorities. And I think what Google actually did quite well was it was no longer, okay, this website is trustworthy, so it's trustworthy for every topic, right? Started saying, okay, actually, there is this small operation that is really going in depth into this particular field, so it is trustworthy in this particular field, right? So it gets a bit more complex, obviously. I'm sort of generalizing, but the TLDR is Google has been doing this, and in some ways been doing this quite successfully. Now, it is true that with AI, there is an increasing, again, disintermediation between the audience, the end user, and the source. I suppose we will see what happens in the future, because this is fairly new. But I think what is quite clear is that the value that people get by doing an AI search is way greater than the value that they get when they do a simple Google search. They are getting the answers straight away. That is not going to change. It's become easier to get information. There's no going back. Okay, so within the industry, again, we can complain about this as much as we want. We can take action, and the action is let's go talk to let's lobby, etc. Great. In parallel, again, this is something that is happening. We need to make sure that we are able to create connections with audiences in a way that, what we are going to lose, I suppose, from Google, etc., we can rebuild some of that anyway. So I think those are things that are happening. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. One quick thing I would say is, we've just to go back to the Google AI search, fewer people are clicking to the original source, but then those people who do click are much more engaged because the intention is for them is, oh, I want more information. So there is that as well, right? So it's not like necessarily just a one-way, I suppose, traffic. There is that sort of benefit, I suppose, to that as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
But the temptation is real, because the summary comes up and you're like, okay, this is quick information. But then, you have to be very mindful. And I do this consciously, not read the summary, but go to the sources.
Well, I do read the summary.
Yeah?
I do read the summary. And what I would say, and I don't know, again, if my behavior is representative of everyone else or other people, but what I would say is, for a lot of things that I ask Google are not important things. How many episodes are there going to be in Celebrity Traitors? When it tells me 9 episodes, I'm like, fine.
Believe it.
Well, why do I need to fact check this? You know what I mean? But why is the sky blue? This is like everyone asks this, so the answer, I trust it. But if I'm doing something for work, etc., and I ask a question, then maybe I'll be more open to fact check. Again, I don't know if that's representative, but I think sometimes we don't give people credit enough. I think people will pay more attention for things that are really important to them.
I still go to IMDb to check how many episodes.
Yeah, there you go.
This is what AI summaries are.
Well, Surabhi is clearly subverting the system.
Yes, exactly. I'm trying to resist at my level as much as I can. But I think we're heading to the end of the episode. And I wanted to ask, because every time we start talking about big tech, I start feeling depressed and like a bit hopeless on what we are going to do. And how do we save the world from AI? But I want to end on a more hopeful note. So I wanted to ask both of you, what gives you hope in terms of the work that you're doing and the kind of journalism and media that you envision that will replace, or not replace, but maybe add to what we have today? So what gives you hope?
I think for us, hope is in the work we do, actually. I mean, if we weren't hopeful, then we wouldn't be continuing to do this over and over again. But I also want to go back to what Khalil said just now, that it's also and this is framing in the context of all of the big tech, AI and so on, is that people's need for information, authenticity, clarity, context, connection are all real. I don't think anything is ever going to replace that. That's human need. Shakespeare's written about it in his plays all the time, and that is perpetuating through centuries. And therefore, for us, the hope is, and which is why we're not bothered whether AI is giving all of what we're saying away for as a summary or free or whatever, because there are people, and those are the people we intend to serve, right? Who want to know, things for, and this includes very young people, those that the world likes to diss and say that, hey, they're not bothered, they're not connected, and so on. So we know what we are doing, we know who we are serving, and there is always a value to a good, authentically told story. It was true 1,000 years ago. It's going to be true 1,000 years from now. Everything else comes and goes. So sticking to the fundamentals and doing your job properly, building good quality, beautiful looking products that serve people, and knowing that you will not be able to serve, and you're not here to serve everyone, right? So doing it as authentically as possible is really why we don't think of all of these other things that come and go as fads and so on. But also the fact that people's lives are resistance themselves, the fact that you continue to live and make the most of it in this and with everything that is around you is resistance, and that resistance gives us hope. You just necessarily don't have to go onto the street every time, but every time someone like you goes to IMDb and not to is resistance. And every time, in every little thing that we do, we are resisting as humans, and that is as true as and like someone said yesterday in the award ceremony, that love and truth and hope are resistance, is something that we kind of stick to and follow quite.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Everything she said.
Everything you said. What gives me hope? Quite a lot of things. I was at a point, I suppose, a few years ago when I became quite cynical. I'm still a bit cynical, I would say, but I suppose for people who are listening who feel a bit cynical about the industry, I am focused on the bright sides of the industry. And for the younger people who want systemic change, push for systemic change. Systemic change is needed. The activists are needed. The activist journalists are needed. That's another conversation, but they are needed. We are all part of a much broader ecosystem, and everything is important. I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we don't control information. I mean, journalists never control, media never control information, but we had more control on information in the past than we have now, and that we'll probably have in the future. That is a reality. So the way to help people is to work with them. Let me just give you an example which comes from a piece written by Patrick Bower, who works in civic journalism, and he's great. I Google him, follow him. So one of the things that he said that really resonated with me was that people are coming together to do things for themselves. As journalists, as people in the media, we don't have to recreate those things. We need to take the skills that we have as journalists, the fact-checking, the rigorous sourcing, etc. Skills that we have that other people don't have. Put those skills to use for those people who are coming together. An example, there are a lot of people who are documenting conditions to protect their communities, and not just in moments of crisis. They are motivated by social bonds rather than public recognition. They see it as care, not as journalism. Who are those people? Your community organizers. Your religious groups checking on the lonely and disconnected. Your diaspora communities tracking homeland conditions. What have they built? They built trust-based communities. How can we, as an industry, how can we help? How can we collaborate? We understand legal frameworks for source protection and public record requests. We could share secure communication methods, help them file FOIA requests, connect them with lawyers who defend information gathering. We know how to recognize patterns and turn them into news products for wider relevance, helping their documentation reach potentially allied communities facing similar issues. They maintain community trust. Our contribution could be to help expand their protective leverage and build coalitions. This is the future of journalism. It is not us telling people what to think, what to do. It is us actually helping people be able to achieve things that will make a better world for everyone.
Surabhi, there's no running away from the fact that audiences have lost trust in media, and we have to work hard to rebuild them. But this conversation with Khalil and Banu makes one thing clear in my head, that there is still a need for good, well-told stories.
Indeed, and I think it's even more important that how these stories are told, right? So even if there's a need to strike this balance between editorial independence and what audience wants or needs, what is more important is that while media makers can still retain agency on what stories need to be told, the audience needs really demonstrates how we can tell those stories so that we can actually engage with our audiences better. And that does mean really understanding our audience well and understanding what is it that will engage them.
Yeah, I agree. The content of the stories need to be guided by what the audiences need. I liked when Khalil spoke about that media right now is producing a lot of stories that are update me, but people want empower me, make me do something, make me feel something. So this is important for media to get back to and not just update, which creates this information overload that is even more with big tech, with AI, summaries, and so on and so forth.
I also really like the point that Bhanu made about, as media makers, how we can still practice small aspects of resistance. So for instance, refraining from actually reading the AI summary and going to the sources and links and actually checking out the work that requires time and investment from journalists and media makers is also a small way how consumers can practice resistance and promote and support public interest work.
Yeah. And connecting this to other episodes that we've had in the past, I think it's also important for media makers to be very transparent about where they receive funding from, where they get the information from, and so on, because it's those little things that matter. Again, going back to our very first episode, we need to always do good journalism.
And we would love to hear from you as well. What did you make of this episode? Were there reflections, ideas, thoughts that you had? Please leave that in the comments. We would love to hear your feedback.
Don't forget to follow us on our socials and listen to other episodes of this series where we unpack public interest media.
This podcast is produced by R&W Media and made possible with funding from Right Here, Right Now 2 program.
Many thanks to our in-house podcasting team and our media production company, Media Matters.